Hi everyone. So I've been looking for a way to help us work with these meshes, these terrain meshes, in a way that we can both model on them and transform them easier, as well as export them to use in Unreal. It's basically just a way to keep the resolution and but reduce the kind of number of faces. So there's this software called Instant Meshes, which you should have received in the email. Very simple software, but we're going to be retopologizing the mesh. But before getting into this, we need to do something to our meshes before we export them from Blender or whatever software you're using. So you can see in Blender, I've gone back to the kind of really high-res mesh. So this one has 1,000,000 faces, so I just increased my multi-res modifier to 8. And so because I want more of this articulation. And so once we got that, we go ahead and do this sequence of duplicate. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the original one. And then the duplicate, go ahead and apply everything. And then go into edit mode and select one of these edges from each side. And then our select loops, edge loops, and then control number pad plus. I'm going to do this 4 times to make sure I get rid of any kind of bend or curvature at the edges, and then delete faces. Okay, so the extra step we're going to do here is because what happens in Instant Remesher is after it retopologizes, you end up with not a clean edge, so there's some weird things it does to the edges. So what we're going to do is we're going to extrude each edge out just to give us some room so we could trim it out afterwards. So I'm going to select one of these. I have to do this one at a time. Edge loops, and then I am in X. I'm going to hit B for extrude. It's going to take a while. Okay, and then hit X to constrain the axis. And that should probably be good enough. And then do the same thing. So basically we're just going to do this to each face. And now constrain to Y. Why is taking so? I can just type in here. Let's go to 5 feet. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to stop this and just do this to the other sides. Okay, so I've extruded all my edges, so I have that extra room here. And then we're just going to go ahead and export this guy. So 1,000,000 faces. export as OBJ. Just make sure that you have selection only, and yeah, your Z up, all these settings should be as before. And then you want to, I'm just renaming this as remesh, just to distinguish it from the other one. And then once you do that, you'll open up instant meshes, and so this is what it actually looks like when you're done before you export it. But so I'm going to go over basically what to do here. It's pretty straightforward. Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you open your mesh and instant meshes, and this is what it brings in. So it's a pretty simple interface. There's not a lot of things to do here. You just want to choose what type of quads you want. I guess you work with triangles, but I typically work with quads. It's better. And this one will allow for an adjustment of the flow of faces a lot smoother, but you will get some triangles with it, versus this one will be all quads. So either one of those is fine. And then down here, we don't need to have these selected because we've added that extra piece, and it kind of eats into the edge anyway. And so here, what we want to do is set the target vertex count. So basically, this is your mesh density. So if you go back to Blender and write this guy is 1 million vertices, which basically the same as the faces. So this is trying to get it down to 65,000. We can get it to even less than that. And again, this is a target count. That doesn't mean that's exactly what you'll get. But I'm finding like anywhere from 19 to low 20s is a pretty good number for this. And once you do it, you can go back and reset it and move this up or down. So the first thing you're going to do is click on Solve for the orientation field. And what I've done with this is I just do this once, and I don't do much here, and I use a position field to control more locally how I want the flow to go. So what you're seeing is you see these kind of colored lines. These are basically telling you the flow of the geometry of how it's going to redistribute the polygon faces, so clearly moving away from the grid. So the algorithm is pretty good at detecting, these ridges and valleys, that those are going in this direction. So it does a pretty good job on its own, but you'll see once we click here on Solve on the position field, it shows us what that new mesh will look like, more or less. And the other thing to note here is that you'll see that these are different options on how you can distribute the path or the flow of the geometry. Right now, nothing is engaged, which means that I can still pan around. Once I engage one of those tools, so I'm going to start with drawing a flow curve on this ridge right here. So once to do that, I'm going to engage the brush button. I can now, if I try to pan, it doesn't, because it wants to draw. So you cannot, you're kind of frozen right now. So what you do is you kind of draw your path, and this doesn't have to be accurate because you'll see it'll redraw the spline. It'll kind of smooth it out a little bit. And then you'll see it'll actually update. So it's updating the distribution. So if you don't like this, if you don't like any path that you draw, you can just click on the X, it'll delete it, then you can redraw it. So from this position, there's a few I can draw. I can draw some of these here. So let's just keep drawing. Actually, I'm not going to draw these. I'm going to reposition to draw those guys there. I can draw this, so I can draw one down here like that. So you'll see, it does a pretty good job actually of reconditioning the geometry. So basically what you're doing is you're using this to draw in where the peaks and valleys are. So anything that has a kind of ridge and then a valley, a kind of indentation, you're just drawing the lines in between there so that all the geometry or all the faces get reconfigured accordingly to that. So to move, to switch view, I need to disengage the brush button. Those paths will go away temporarily. And then now I'm gonna position myself around here and work in this area. So I'm going to go back to the button. And then first I'm going to draw one right around the base of that peak. And then just start to draw around here. So you can see what it's doing. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of this, but so this is the general idea. Okay, so you can see how I filled up this whole thing. And once you've got this set and you're happy with the redistribution, then we just go to Export Mesh. And then here, you can try pure quad mesh. So it's all, yeah, it's all basically quads and no triangles. Not sure if it works perfectly well, but you can try it. And then actually we want to bump this up to about 3 or so, because otherwise what happens if this is set to 0, then you might have some holes or some weird geometry, especially in like the tighter areas. So this just kind of helps smooth some of that out. And then extract mesh. There you go. So now you can see what it looks like, and then we can turn this off. And then you can go and inspect it. So yeah, you want to go and you can see it, you know, smooth it out a little bit. It's not going to smooth it perfectly, but we can do that in another software where we have more local control. But so what you're looking for are making sure that there's no holes. But see, like, you want to be careful for things like this. See how the geometry is getting a little wonky here. So it looks like faces are intersecting. So I might go back and increase that smooth. 5 seems to have worked. Okay, so let's go show input. Go back here. Let's go. Should be able to do this. And then, nope, it didn't fix it. Okay, so, shoot. Oh no, did it? Yeah, okay, kind of did. Did something there. Okay, so that might be easy enough to fix. But so that's kind of what you want to look for. So make sure that there's no holes and not too much kind of self-intersecting faces, things like that. Okay, so once it's good, then we'll just go save. And then this should be like a pretty small file. But you'll see that the edges are a bit wonky, so we're just going to trim that stuff out to get a cleaner edge. Okay, so I've imported that OBJ into Rhino. So all we're going to do here is we're going to trim out that extra perimeter that we added. And so for some reason, I'm not sure what's going on, but the units, I know that the units in Blender and Rhino are matching. They're both in feet. For some reason, it's coming out of a different size or scale. Anyway, so we're just going to use this dimension and then add 10 feet, 5 for either side that we added in Blender. So I'm going to start by getting a bounding box. And we can just use solid since we're going to need the solid to split it. Let me change this. Okay, so we just need to get one of these distances. So 275 feet. So that's what this should be. Plus 10 for, remember, so we added 5 either side. So I'm going to scale this to 285. Okay, so now that matches that size. Now I'm going to use the bounding box, and I'm going to basically reset it to that size. And I'm just going to use the move face command here. Where is it? Move face in the solids. And then make sure that this is set to normal, the direction constraint. And so type in 5, and then just do that all the way around. Obviously you can scale it. But I didn't feel like doing the math, so. Okay, there we go. And so now I'm just going to scale this up a little bit. Select the mesh and split it using that bounding box. And that should, there we go. Great. Okay, so now this thing is clean. Now we're going to export this into Maya. And while it can be done with Blender, I figure that you guys are more familiar with Maya, and Maya is just easier to, it's nicer to fly around in Maya. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this to Maya and kind of smooth it out and then begin to pull out some of the features and then go over some modeling techniques for how to kind of work with this thing. Alright, so I'm just going to export it again as OBJ, and then we'll go into Maya. Okay, so I'm in Maya now, and you guys probably know this already, but I'm going to just go over a few settings that I like to use. So in your Windows settings preferences, just make sure that your up axis is Z and you're in foot in your working units. Make sure your undo is on and infinite. And I do like to use the autosave every 30 minutes or so. Okay, and that's about it for there. I'm poly modeling, so you know all these different tabs. I don't know if you know about this, that you can add any kind of tool to any of these tabs. And so things that I use a lot, like center pivot, delete history, freeze transformation, and measure tools, I throw on here. And so to do that, if you go to any of these, if I go to modify freeze transformation, and then hit Control Shift and then left click, it'll add it up into here. So that's kind of useful. What else? Make sure that you use your outliner to manage all your objects. I rarely use layers. I typically use layers for different geometry types, or if I have larger files, I'll begin to use layers just to provide color differences. But most everything is done in the outliner. And so if you don't have that open, go to Windows, Outliner. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and import that file. Okay, there it is. It should be the right size. And so what we can do to verify this is the right size is we can throw a bounding box on it in Maya. We just have to duplicate this guy. So Control D, duplicate it. And then the duplicate, I'm going to go modify, convert geometry to bounding box. There you go. Okay, so I've got that. I'm just going to use it to verify dimensions. I'm going to go to my distance tool and type V to snap to vertex. And it's not the right size, so I don't know why it's doing this, why this is freaking out, all this dimensional stuff. Okay, so it's a kind of metric to imperial conversion issue, and I'm not sure why it's doing it, but anyway, so if you don't know yet, it is 2.54 centimeters per inch. So sometimes that is the key number to convert, and then it's like 30.48 centimeters per foot. So that's the number we need to increase this thing by. So if you do the math, like this should be 275 feet. So if you divide 275 feet by this number, you'll get that 30.48 number. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete all that. And so I'm going to select my surface. And so we just want to make sure that both of these guys have the same center pivot. So when I select that, they're at basically the world origin. So I'll select both of them and then just go here in the channel box editor, and you just drag in all three XYZ scale, 30.48 fit. Okay. It's another thing that you probably know, but again, I'll just go over. If you do something like this and all of a sudden you can't see anything because it's clipping, you just need to click on your perspective camera, go to the attribute editor, and make sure the far clip plane is big enough. So this is, this is how you control where the camera clips the object, or your scene in terms of near and far. So I usually just set this at like 10,000 or 100,000. And so you kind of need to do that for all of these. So you can see these two, I haven't set it. And for some reason, like you can set that in the preferences, but it never stays the same. So if I go to cameras, where are my cameras? There we go. See, it's set properly here, but for some reason it doesn't translate. So you just have to reset it manually. And then I usually put this 0.1 if I'm in feet. Let's do the same thing here. And then the other thing to do is sometimes if we go to our 4-panel view, we might not see anything, and it's because once we scale up so big, the cameras might be, I already fixed it, but the cameras might be not far enough away from it. So if we select all three and go Shift H, the cameras will turn on. That's unhiding them. And so now we can see that this camera is, clipping our object. So I'm just going to move it out of the way. So let's just make sure all the cameras are back enough. And you know that vector is the camera direction. So now I can see everything. But so if it looks like this, right, then I don't see anything here because the camera is not behind the object. Okay, so once you get that set, you want to make sure to hide these cameras again, because if you leave them on and accidentally do something, you can really mess up your scene. So Control H to hide those suckers. Okay, let's go back here and let's just verify our dimension. No, not great. Let's make sure, hold on, let's make sure we didn't use any surface vertices. Yep, there we go, 275, perfect. Okay, great. Now that's good. We can hide this or delete it. Don't need it for now. Okay, so here's our surface, our mesh. And let's just go in here. So see that one little funky guy right here? Yeah, it's a weird four-sided, it's a weird two four-sided faces, but I'm just going to get rid of these guys. We don't need that. Edit mesh, delete edge vertex. Oh, didn't like that. Interesting. What is going on here? Let's delete that and delete that. Okay. And then I'm just going to, I haven't worked in Maya for a while. I'm going to append to polygon. Is that the one? I think so. I'm going to, oh, that's not it. And Maya froze. Okay, let me fix that.